Hello, we are beginning our third part of this series, What Do We Need to Know About World Religions? We have spent 2 weeks on Christianity and 2 weeks on Judaism, and today we begin with part one, What Do We Need to Know About Islam? Islam today, interest in Islam, especially in many parts of the United States, and I'm sure among the Christian community, is largely due in reaction to the 9/11 attacks. Sad to say, but I think that's true. We tend to see Islam through the lens of fundamentalists, radical Islamists, and we don't do that with Christianity and Judaism because we are familiar with those religions. Familiarity with Judeo-Christian religions gives us the space to contextualize any radicalism. But that's largely not the case with Islam. And so it's an effort to try to move past that. But it's an important effort for us. Islam's roots are in Arab culture. Arabs trace their ancestry back to Abraham through his son Ishmael. Muslims trace their faith history back to Abraham as well. Christians and Jews also trace our faith history back to Abraham. It is appropriate to speak then of a Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. Christianity saw itself superseding Judaism by God's will, and Islam sees itself, or at least did originally, as superseding Christianity also by God's will. There are almost 2 billion followers of Islam in the world today. That's almost as many as there are Christians. I think that was about 2.4 billion. They are living in some 56 countries, mostly in Africa and Asia, not the Middle East. And even though Islam began in Arabia, only 20% of Muslims are Arab. There is a great diversity in cultures, political situations, politics, role and dress of women, all these things in modern Islam, vast diversity. And in some countries, Islam and the state are intertwined with each other, while in other countries, such as the United States, Islam is a minority religion. In some Muslim states, women's roles are severely restricted, fully covered with clothing. They don't drive cars. They're segregated by gender. While in other societies, Islamic women wear Western clothing, drive, are fully involved in leadership roles, even having served as prime minister of the country. The name Islam means submission or surrender, and it is from the same root as the word peace. Islam, like written Hebrew and Aramaic, is a consonant written, or at least was a consonant written language. And so SLM are the root words for salam, for shalom, meaning peace. This is submission to God's will. That is the path of peace. There are close affinities and affiliations with Christianity and Judaism. All three are exemplified by rich diversity in different cultures. All three affirm that the earth is a gift from God and people hold it in stewardship. There are rewards and punishments based on how people obey God. There is a goal to create a socially just society. Christendom, the 1,200 years of Christian dominance in Western Europe in the Middle Ages, was at least ideally a socially just society. And so that is the goal of Islam as well, by enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil. All three share a profound monotheism. Each is seeking to answer the basic question, why am I here? Why are we here? All three faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, believe in angels, believe in Satan, believe in prophets, in heaven and hell, in moral accountability, in revelation, and in divine judgment. Islam sees not a separation between church and state, but an intertwining of church and state, a continuous process of applying Islam to public and private life. Christians, in contrast, have a little more of a mixed relationship with the government. since the Christian church was persecuted by the state up until the 4th century, when Constantine moved the Christian church into the position of power. And in the United States today, we believe very clearly in a separation of church and state. Both Islam and Christianity believe that Scripture represents the Word of God, but that it is mediated and interpreted through the words of people. Most of the interpreters were men in patriarchal societies. Terrorists in the name of Islam have brought great destruction, 9/11, etc., threatening Islamic countries and others, yet these terrorists reflect only a small percentage of Muslims. Islamic belief, practice, and history do contain violence, and yet that's not central to the Islamic faith any more than holy war is central to Judaism or Christian faith. One of the challenges that we as non-Muslims face is to see our own prejudice in relation to Islam because of our introduction to it through the Iranian Revolution in 1979, through the 9/11 terror attacks, through the presence of terrorism today in groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS that dominate headlines. Our challenge is to trust that the vast majority of Muslims seek peace and are trying to follow what they believe is God's will. The rest of us must decide how we relate to Islam, especially as we get to know more Muslim people in our daily lives. The 5 pillars of Islam, core beliefs and practices. What does it mean to be a practicing Muslim? Well, it's very simple to accept and to practice the 5 pillars of Islam. They are the declaration of faith, the practice of salat, that is prayer and worship, the zakat, the tithe, the fast of Ramadan, and the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. These pillars unite all Muslims worldwide across widely diverse cultures and practices. Now, jihad is sometimes called the unofficial 6th pillar, but it's not. Jihad means struggle and really refers to the internal struggle to live well, though some see it as a physical struggle like holy war against violent opposition. So the declaration of faith, first, is a simple phrase: there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. That's it. It's a lot shorter than most of our Christian creeds. Muhammad is considered the final prophet and messenger. All prophecies lead to Muhammad, and none supersede his. Muhammad is only a human being, not divine at all. The declaration is the only Islamic statement of belief. The remaining 4 pillars are about practice. Allah means God, so there is no God but God. There is no God but Allah, saying the same thing. It's Arabic for God. And the understanding of Allah is very similar to a Jewish and Christian understanding, the absolute oneness of God. To Muslims, the worship of Jesus as God is anathema, and Trinity is one belief that led Muslims to reject Christianity as flawed. Then there's the salat, the daily practice of prayer and worship. 5 times each day, devout Muslims pray or worship, or pray and worship, morning, noon, mid-afternoon, evening, and night. It is acceptable to worship alone, but it is better with others. This prayer worship time includes recitations from the Quran and can be performed bowing. We've seen that practice on your knees with your forehead to the ground. I'm not sure I could do that anymore. In fact, I'm pretty sure I cannot. But bowing could be done sitting or other ways, but always facing Mecca, the house of God, east of here. Originally, they faced Jerusalem because early Muslims believed that Jews and Christians would eventually accept their revelation. The mosque is a place to pray, and there is a congregational prayer service each Friday. Shoes are always removed for worship. Most religious faiths, Jews and Christians, certainly are familiar with the concept of a tithe. And the zakat, the tithe, or almsgiving, is a required practice that purifies the soul of giver and receiver. And that would be very consistent with Judaism and Christianity. This offering has always been taken to support the poor. And so it served as kind of a social welfare structure in Islamic cultures. The tithe is to be based on 2.5% of one's total wealth and assets. Think about that. Now, in Judeo-Christian tradition, we think of a tithe as 10% of income, 2.5% of one's total wealth and assets. Depending on one's total wealth and assets, might be significantly more than that. The tithe is given during the month of Ramadan, the great month of fasting. It is not a voluntary giving, but it is an obligation. And then the fast of Ramadan is the fourth pillar. Ramadan is the 9th month in the Islamic calendar, and it's the occasion for fasting. Let me just, I'll talk about this a little later, but like the Jewish calendar, the Islamic calendar is lunar-based, based on the lunar cycle, and so it does not have as many days in a year, as much time in a year as a solar cycle in which now our general societal calendar is based, and the Christian calendar. And so feasts that are fixed to a certain date in the Islamic calendar can actually move throughout the year because of the number of days, only 350 some odd days in the year. And so it kind of keeps moving forward. So Ramadan is the 9th month, but it could happen many times. It does move around through the seasons. Muslims whose health permits must abstain during the day, during Ramadan, must abstain during the day from food, drink, and sexual activity for the purpose of spiritual growth. Many non-observant Muslims still participate in the fast, and at dusk each day, when the sun goes down, the fast is broken with a light supper called breakfast. Then prayers are offered at the mosque. On the 27th day of Ramadan, Muslims celebrate the Night of Power and Excellence, it's sometimes called, the time when Muhammad received the first of God's revelations. At the end of Ramadan, there's a large feast called Eid al-Fitr, something like that. I apologize for my pronunciation, but it is a joyful breaking of the fast. Special foods are part of that, and it is really a joyful festival. Many ways has the same feel that Christmas does in American society. Great joy, special foods, a real celebration time. The 5th pillar is the Hajj, that is the great pilgrimage to Mecca, in which every adult Muslim who is physically and financially able participates at least once in their lives. Those who absolutely cannot do the Hajj are excused, but all pilgrims, whether rich or poor, dress alike on the pilgrimage. There are lots of activities and networking in and around the Mecca area of Mecca, and this has been called to be a life-changing experience for those who participate. Now, jihad, again, is not one of the pillars of Islam, but some call it the unofficial 6th pillar. Jihad literally means striving, and it refers to the internal striving or struggle to be faithful, to be a good Muslim. And there are correlations in Judaism, and I know in Christianity, when we talk about the spiritual journey. It is the journey of trying to live well. Some have used jihad to mean defending the faith from the outside by striving to defeat external foes by any means necessary, including violence. Most Muslims do not advocate this understanding and this approach to jihad, but it is definitely present, and many in our world today tend to judge Islam based on that openness to violence. Anyway, those are the 5 pillars, and they are crucial to understand the nature of Islam. Central to Islam is the Prophet Muhammad, the prophet and the messenger of God. Muhammad is considered by Islam to be God's prophet, the last in the line of prophets from Judaism through Christianity, also to be God's messenger, the one who received the visions that became the Quran, and whose example guides human beings to know the right way to live. He was the religious, political, and military leader of a community state, and his teaching and examples took place in response to 7th century Arabian society. And that society was polytheistic, many gods, tribalistic, and multicultural. It was a society that included the presence of Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism. There was little sense of cosmic moral purpose or moral responsibility in that society. And so Islam, in many ways, grew in response to that society by having a very strong sense of moral purpose and responsibility. Muhammad was born in Mecca, Arabia, in 570 AD, or CE, the Common Era. He was orphaned at an early age and raised by his uncle, who was well-respected and a tribal elder. Though illiterate and poor, Muhammad earned his living as the business manager for the caravans of a wealthy widow named Khadija. Arabia was located between two powerful but aging and fading empires, Byzantia and Persia. There was constant tension between the two empires and also within the tribal life of Arabia. Muhammad married Khadija when he was 25 and she was 40. She was his only wife for 24 years that they were married, and he had the reputation of being honest and having integrity. Muhammad was also a very spiritual person and regularly retreated to a nearby hillside cave for personal reflection. And one night in 610, he received the first of many visions from Allah, from God, through the angel Gabriel. Yes, the same angel that we find in the Jewish and Christian Bibles. This was called the Night of Power and Excellence. Muhammad was commanded by Gabriel to recite what he had heard and to remember it exactly. He continued to receive these visions for the remainder of his life, the next 22 years. After being assured by his wife that he was not crazy, she became the first convert to Islam, which was an effort to reform Arabian society, much like the Old Testament prophets did in Israel. The revelation came to Muhammad in the context of warlike 7th century Arabia. His efforts to implement the revelation met with resistance from those in power. After 10 years of persecution and resistance in Mecca, Muhammad and the early Muslims moved to Medina, where Muhammad served as prophet, political ruler, military commander, chief judge, and lawgiver. During those 10 years, Muhammad experienced the night journey in which he was taken by Gabriel to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount, the site of the great Jewish temples. And while there, Muhammad climbed a mystical ladder where he encountered prophets from Moses to Jesus. He then entered God's presence and learned about the Salat, the prayer 5 times daily. Eventually, when Muhammad had made some peace with Mecca, he determined that the Kaaba, the small house in Mecca, around which the pilgrimage is often focused, had actually been a home built by Abraham and Ishmael. So he cleansed it of all the gods that had been there, because that had been used by Arabian society kind of as a tourist attraction, and it became the destination for Islam's Hajj, the pilgrimage. Muhammad and Khadija had 2 sons who both died in childbirth, and 4 daughters who presumably did not die in childbirth, who lived and grew up. While in Medina, Islam transformed from a religion only to a political system. Muhammad ruled that community. The system allowed Jews and Christians to live in peace so long as they were loyal and paid a tax. Eventually, hostilities with Mecca led to hostilities between Muslims and some Jews. And by the end of his life, Muhammad's army had subdued Mecca and all of Arabia. Muslims believe that the Quran represents both the original and the final revelation to God, or from God to humankind, and that in that sense it made Islam the oldest rather than the newest of the monotheistic faiths. Conflict arose at Muhammad's death about his successor. The majority Sunni group chose his uncle and close friend, Abu Bakr, since he was the most qualified and since he had been Muhammad's trusted advisor. Sunni meant followers of the example. Now, there was a minority group as well called the Shia, and they thought that it should be a hereditary succession. They supported Ali, who was Muhammad's first cousin, his closest male relative. Shia meant the party of Ali. After several leaders, caliphs, Ali finally became caliph 35 years later, but he was assassinated soon thereafter. The differences between Sunnis and Shias are primarily political, not theological. So that is a beginning of the introduction and what you need to know about Islam. Next week, we'll pick it up from there and look at the history of Islam and Islam today.